Hello guys and welcome to another episode of Chronicles of Life. Today we have a special guest who is Alexander Lewis. He's a fashion designer based in London who's worked with celebrities and stars in the fashion world internationally with years of stories to share. Hello Alexander.
Hi Spiros, how are you?
How are you?
Good, thank you. A little out of breath. I finished a workout not too long ago. It's one of my rules with Clubhouse. I either have to work out or meditate either before or after.
Oh, okay. So
If I'm going to sit on it for like an hour, that way my head space is still clear.
yeah, I know what you mean. I do the same thing as well, but I usually don't do it like in the middle of the day. I usually do it when it comes to meditate, first thing in the morning and last thing before I fall asleep. So
Right.
okay. So how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Thank you again.
I see Natalie in the room.
Yeah. Just to let Natalie and everyone else who will come later, probably, if not, that is going to be recorded because I'm using it for my own personal podcast. So, thank you, Alexander, for accepting my request. It's really a pleasure, and I've been searching for you in the internet, and I realized that you are a star actually. So I'm honored, I can say, because you've been through a lot and you've done a lot of things in your life, and especially in the fashion industry. So I'm really want to go deep with you and see your history and what you've been through and all your trips that you've done in your life, and which I think it's going to be really interesting to hear. So
Cool.
yeah, I've seen those kind of postcards as well that you have on your website, and it was really interesting. So you were born in Chicago. You lived
I
in
was, yes.
Yeah, you lived in San Francisco. Then you get schooled in London. Then you moved again in the States in LA, and then to study, and then you work for the Oscars as well, if I'm correct.
I did work at the Oscars. I was assisting Andre Leon Talley,
Okay.
which was how it ended up happening because he was working with a combination of styling several people at the Oscars or for the Vanity Fair after party. And then in addition to that, he was doing or curating and hosting a fashion show of the history of Oscars fashion at the Academy.
Okay. So you were assistant to Vogue next to Andre Leon Talley, right?
Correct.
Yeah, who was the creative director of the magazine of the Vogue.
He did used to be. When we did this, when I worked for him, I
Yeah.
don't think he was still in that position. I think by then it was Grace Coddington, but he had previously been the creative director. And then
Okay.
when I worked for him, he was He was the editor at large.
Okay. So, and here in London, you started your fashion journey in tailored at Savile Row.
So yeah, correct.
Yes.
I mean, I ended up coming to London to work on Savile Row because of Andre and Lisa Love, who was then and still is the West Coast editor of US Vogue. It was their advice to me to come back to London and go to Savile Row to train as a cutter.
I'm a little bit know about Savile Row, but have some really nice and expensive men's suits. I could tell they're really fascinating and interesting. So uh, let's go like more detail in that journey. So you're born in Chicago. Um, how was the life developed? How was start your journey?
Well, I mean, I was born there, yes, but I left when I was about 1, so I don't really have a
Memories.
lot of. My relationship with Chicago came later, really. So when I was 1, I moved to California, to the Bay Area, to San Francisco, with my mother and my dad, and then my mom and my dad actually split up, which is why I moved there. But my dad came as well. They got back together, and then eventually they decided to split up completely and get a divorce. And so I was living in San Francisco between my mom and my father until when I was about 8 and a half, we moved to the UK because my mother had been engaged to and then married to a Scotsman, a Brit, and that's what brought us back to the UK.
Okay, okay, okay.
But I
And
went to school in San Francisco at a school called Stewart Hall for Boys, which was kind of a prestigious, prep school, or I guess you'd call it, for boys there in San Francisco. It was very like traditional, and I just grew up doing like loads of different sports and gymnastics, baseball, basketball, whatever I could get my hands on, I suppose. But at the same time, I was always doing loads and loads of arts and crafts, ceramics, making things. And my other love and passion was specifically theater.
okay,
So I always wanted to be an actor, actually.
okay, okay. So you wanted to be an actor. You were in the sports. You were doing different things like basketball and stuff, but your main purpose was to be an actor. And then that was in San Francisco where you were studying.
Exactly. But
Yeah,
I mean, I was very young. This was until
yeah.
I came to the United Kingdom when I was 8.5.
Hmm.
But I sort of did everything I could that was in like the arts field. I was even for a while in a children's circus in San Francisco, and I was a junior ringleader, and I did the trapeze and clowning and all these different things. So I really kind of did all the different things that I could get my hands on. I was also in the San Francisco Boys Choir. Um, so my parents were like very encouraging of me doing as many extracurricular activities as I could like manage to cram into an afternoon until my reading sort of faltered, and then they took me out until my reading level was good enough to sort of be on top of my schoolwork, and then I got to do all the extracurricular activities again.
So you get school in London, and then you moved again to States, to Los Angeles, to study in uni.
Correct. So
Yeah.
yeah, after when I was 8.5, I moved to London. I went to boarding school here in the UK to Harrow, which is your very typical British boys boarding school, and that was really probably where my love for fashion really started. I was acting all along and doing like all the theater stuff in school, but then I ended up just hiding in my room, as it were, when I wasn't doing anything to do with theater. And I spent all my time reading magazines like The Face, ID, Dazed and Confused, cutting out all these, photographs and pictures and plastering them on the room and the billboard in my room and stuff like that. And it was always something that was like around me. My family was very fashion adjacent, I suppose you could say. My mother has kind of always been really into style, and she has always been very much, an important figure in that way, as have pretty much all the women in my family. But even my dad was always really into fashion in a sense, and worked in the footwear business. So I was always very kind of exposed to it. And then when I went to university in LA after I finished at high school in London, I actually went to study acting at USC in Los Angeles. But all the while, I had this notion in the background that like one day possibly I could be this masked designer who was also an actor, and that eventually I'd have this red carpet moment where I would reveal take off my mask, and everybody would see that the actor and the designer were the same person. But I got to a place where I realized that acting in the program at the university was really kind of not for me, because I found that a lot of the kids in my class, being in Los Angeles, acting is really focused on television and film, and I think I was more of a thespian style actor for the theater. And they would always kind of be like looking over my shoulder in a conversation, not because they were looking for somebody else, but because they were looking for the camera. And I mean, this was like outside of acting class. So I kind of just got to this place where I was like, this isn't really for me anymore. I think I'm going to probably shift away from acting. I finished with a degree in communication and business, for entertainment, culture, and society as a focus, and that kind of allowed me to sort of, I guess, already pivot into like a fashion career. And alongside that, at the university, in the business school, there was a fashion club. And we had all these people coming in doing talks and seminars and visits to factories and to brands in Los Angeles. And I mean, at the time, LA was really pretty much exclusively t-shirts and denim as an industry. way less mature than it is today. And as a result, we now, we decided eventually to stage our own fashion show for the students to all be able to get involved in. At that time was kind of like the sort of epitome of fashion, was a fashion show, and LA did have a fashion week, and we wanted to align ourselves as a student body that wasn't a fashion school with LA Fashion Week to try to get some interest from the people that were there. So I was the president of this group of the Fashion Industry Association, and we decided that any students at the school that wanted to put together a collection were able to, and then we would show them alongside LA brands that we had managed to practically, I don't know, twist their arms or coerce, somehow convince them to take part in our show as a venue for LA Fashion Week, not at the main sort of Smashbox Studios venue. So that was really the beginning, because then I decided, well, if I'm asking people to do this, I might as well do it myself. So I made my first collection.
Wow.
At that time, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Which kind of was cool and hard and a big struggle and wild. And I was driving up and down the freeway from downtown LA to school to like Laguna Beach and down to the port of Los Angeles and all these places where there were different factories that I could work with, trying to get samples made just to put together, a semblance of a collection. And I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. And not that it was any different than any other kids. There were maybe 3 or 4 students that we decided could show alongside the professional or like the legitimate real brands. And so I wasn't the only one. I was one of maybe 3 or 4 students that did it. And in the second year, it had been so successful, we managed to get sort of backing, and we managed to pull even more brands away from Los Angeles, like Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week at Smashbox Studios, to show at the university, which was super strange that they were doing this. So we actually had all of a sudden like real press and real buyers and, kind of the real people that you'd get and expect at a fashion week showing up to attend like our schedule of shows. And so I decided to put on what really became like the sort of core idea of my eventual brand, years later. Let me think how many years later, like probably 6 years later when I launched my brand. It was really based off of the idea that I kind of formulated working on that second collection when I was still at university. So it was kind of like a really cool, crazy experience that we just, as students, just threw ourselves into.
Cool. And then you became assistant to Andrew Leon Talley. When?
Yeah, so that was like right after I graduated university.
Okay.
I stayed in LA. I had been working during university at Decades, which is this really amazing vintage haute couture and designer resale shop in LA on Melrose. And I mean, at the time, he was sort of at the center of the fashion universe in a way, which people don't really necessarily either remember or know today. But Cameron Silver, who's the owner, he was really, really crucial in bringing vintage both to the red carpet, but also to fashion houses all over the fashion industry, whether it was Milan, Paris, London, or New York. We would have, whether it was the name of the designer, on the business, or like the design teams from so many companies coming to us to do their research, because we had the access to archives of collectors or archives of clients of the haute couture houses, and we would buy and source things. So they would come in, and it was really, really kind of an amazing time to work there. And I guess like a funny anecdote that comes alongside working for Andre was that at that time, literally every designer was coming through, whether it was, Donatella Versace or Marc Jacobs or Anna Sui or like just tons of people, and Tom Ford as well was coming through there. And this was still Gucci days for Tom Ford. So it was a really interesting time to like be exposed to these people, as well as celebrities, stylists, like Rachel Zoe in that time was like a big stylist who was shopping for her clients. And so I worked there, and then a friend of mine who was friends with somebody that worked at West Coast Vogue said, they're looking for somebody to assist Andre Leon Talley. He's coming to Los Angeles to work on a project for the Oscars, and there's not really anybody in the office at the moment that could do that. Are you available? And I was actually interning alongside my job at Decades for a company that doesn't exist now called Corpus. And the other intern at the time, which he probably doesn't remember, was Matthew Williams, who's now the creative director of Givenchy in Paris. So this is like going so far back. But so I took this role. I left the internship and took this job working for Andre on Talley. And basically he was there to film 2 episodes of The Hills, which I don't know if you know of, but it was kind of really like a precursor to so many shows at the time, of the time of this sort of like reality TV following young, kids living their lives. So there's 2 episodes where if you find them with Andre, I'm also in those randomly. And then he was styling several people, including Jennifer Hudson and Kimora Lee Simmons, Naomi Campbell. There's one more that I can't remember, for either red carpet at the Oscars or red carpet at the Vanity Fair after party. And so
How old were you back then?
How old was I?
Yeah.
I was 20.
Wow, really young. Wow.
Yeah, I was quite young at the time, that's true. And so that was like one of the most unbelievable. I will cherish that experience forever. It was really an unusual kind of exposure to a world that, to me at that time was just literally magazines. And the only thing that had really come out to sort of lift the lid on it for sort of the layman or the greater population was The Devil Wears Prada, as a film and a book that people kind of like relate with the experience of working for a magazine or an editor like Andre or at Vogue, would have really been like in reality. So I just remember my very first day working for him, I was given sort of one of those impossible lists of tasks to fulfill. And one of them found me sort of like driving all over the city with a credit card that wasn't mine to buy a pair of shoes that was almost impossible to find. And in America, you cannot use somebody else's credit card. You need to sign for it. You need to show an ID. And I found myself in a store telling the sales assistant that it was, I said to them, have you ever seen the film The Devil Wears Prada? And they said, yes, I have. And I said, this is The Devil Wears Prada. It's happening right now. And if I don't show up with these shoes in my hand in an hour's time by the end of the day, I'm going to lose my job on the first day. And she just like looked at me like I was insane. And I just said, please, you have got to help me. I'm not making this up. And she ran the credit card and she helped me. And, the shoes were not exactly the right width, but they worked, and he didn't notice any difference. So it sort of saved me. And I've never like thought of saying anything quite as absurd as that in my life, but in the moment it really seemed like the best course of action. So that was really a cool experience.
Wow.
And we've stayed in touch ever since. So
I mean, being 20 years old, having all these big names, I mean, that would be a really, really great experience for someone who starts, being around big names and fashion industry. And wow. And then you left after all this experience to come back to London. How that happened?
So basically, I was working, still for Andre, and he ended up staying in Los Angeles longer than he was originally supposed to do. He filmed this segment for the Oscars. We were on the red carpet doing red carpet interviews with people. At the Vanity Fair party. Then he stayed, he had more meetings, and I was still assisting him, and it just kept, going. And then at one party, we ran into somebody who said to him, oh, Andre, have you seen Alex's designs? They're really great, and I'm sure you'd love them. And this was somebody that I knew that I didn't know knew him at the time, somebody called Derek Blasberg. And Andre looked at me and he was like, you're a designer? And I said, well, I'm working as your assistant. I didn't want to say anything. And he's like, this is ridiculous. Tomorrow morning you have to come to the Vogue offices at 9 a.m. to show me and Lisa Love. We need a presentation of all your collections, your archive, all your designs. Bring everything. And I was like, okay, tomorrow at 9? He said, yes, tomorrow at 9 at the Vogue offices. So after the party, I dropped him off in his car at his hotel, and I went home, and I just spent all night like preparing everything I had. And this was after I'd done the 2 shows. So I had 2 actual collections of samples made up. And I also had sketchbooks going back till the age when I was 14 that I like took with me everywhere that I went, you know, when I moved. So I had like 6 years of sketches and 2 collections that I went to the Vogue offices in the morning. An assistant gave me a rail, and I did basically like a go-see as though I was doing a go-see for Vogue. It was like the most surreal thing that I'd heard of these things happening to people, but it wasn't really what I was looking for out of the experience of working for Andre. And they were just super supportive, both of them. And they said, you know, we think what you need to do is move back to London. We can see exactly what we want to see here, but we really think that it would benefit you to go and train on Savile Row as a cutter. It looks like your skill set really is honed in on menswear. And once you've done that, come back to us and we will help you. And I said, wow, okay, great, sure. You know, I didn't really know what to say, and I was not really in the mindset of moving back to London. I really had sort of made LA my home. I'd been there for 4 years. I had, still to this day, some of my best, closest friends live in LA, and I'm back in London. And I had a lot to think about. In the meantime, Andre went back to New York, and he called me and said, I'd like you to come to New York. I want to introduce you to Alex Bolin, who's the CEO of Oscar de la Renta. They're thinking about starting a menswear collection, and I'd like you to come and meet him. And while you're here, I can see if I can set up any other meetings for you. And I said, okay, great. When should I come? He's like, well, come as soon as you can, and just call me to let me know when you arrive. Which is, it's these crazy things that people like ask you to do without thinking if you're actually capable of doing them or not, you know. So I did manage to go to New York pretty quickly, and I let him know that I had arrived, and he set up an interview or a meeting with me with Alex Bolin, and he also set up a couple other appointments and interviews. But the reason I had wanted to bring up earlier that one of the customers at Decades was Tom Ford was because he had come in sort of once early on while I was working at Decades, and he came in once much later when I was working at Decades. And he remembered me. We sort of, you know, had like the shop assistant who serves the regular customer kind of relationship, nothing exciting or to write home about. But I said to him at that time, because I was alone in the store with him, I asked him, you know, how it would work to possibly, you know, get a job with him or work for him one day. And he said, well, if you ever come to New York, just let me know. And he gave me his assistant's email address. So I emailed him when I got to New York to say that or emailed the assistant to say that I was there, and forwarded my CV, and I had asked to possibly, you know, if he had any time at all. I was in town for, 4 days, and I would just, you know, be available whenever he needed to see me. And we arranged and canceled definitely 2 times and possibly 3 times in those days that I was there. And I felt like, well, that's just not going to happen. Meanwhile, I took the meetings that Andre had been kind enough to set up for me, and they were, you know, good, and I felt good about them, and I felt like there was maybe something going to come out of it, but probably not immediately. It's just sort of like a connection making exercise. And I was walking down the street, and I saw a car in traffic, a town car, sitting at the red light, and the back seat window on the passenger side was open, and Tom Ford was sitting in the car. And I was talking on the phone, so I decided to walk alongside his car, keeping an eye on it to see where he was going and hoping that he might get out of the car because of the traffic. And 2 blocks later, the car pulled over to the curb and he got out. And I wasn't on the phone anymore. I was sort of pretending I was on the phone because I think I was talking to my dad, and I was like, I can't talk to you right now. I can't tell you what is happening, but I'll call you back afterwards. And I think he thought it was also like something really bad was happening. So I don't know where this like energy came from, but I literally just walked up to Tom Ford on the street, and I reintroduced myself. I reminded him that we'd met twice in Decades, that we had, you know, give me his assistant's email and said, please reach out to me when you're in New York, which I did, and we weren't able to set up the meeting, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, he thought it was all kind of amusing, I think. And then I said to him, are you going somewhere nearby? And he goes, well, I'm just going a few blocks up the street to my office. And I said, well, can I walk you there? And he said, sure. So I don't know what I was hoping out of that experience, but I was hoping to have some kind of like, on the street, on the fly interview with Tom Ford. And trying not to like appear too scary for having sort of like followed his car for several blocks and then pounced on him when he got out. But the cool thing about it was that he said, well, I live in London. If you're ever in London, please let me know. I'm setting up my brand there. It'd be great to meet with you if that's something that's, in your future. And he kind of just left it like very open-ended, but it was all in, the ball was in my court. Should I ever end up in London again? Maybe he'd meet with me. There could be something. Who the hell knows? But it just sort of gave me this feeling that like actually maybe it was time to go back to London. So I went back to LA, and it was the 1st of May, and I called my mom in London, and probably the best phone call of her life. And I said to her, Mom, I'm moving back to London. She's like, what? I thought, your life was in LA and you're doing everything there and everything's going so. I said, you know what? I'm just going to get a ticket and I'm going to be back there by the 31st. And she's like, okay, if you're sure. And so I just spent a month literally like closing my life, getting rid of, my apartment, my car, all my possessions. I didn't want to go back with anything more than like my suitcases, 5 suitcases still, but and I got on a plane on the 30th and I was back here on the 31st of May. And that was kind of due both to Andre. Sorry, you lose me, or it's okay. That was due kind of both to Andre and to Tom Ford, and at least. So kind of weird and crazy how like everything was pointing me to come back here to try to go to Savile Row.
Yeah, I mean it's
So
really.
I got back.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Carry on. Sorry.
Go ahead, sir. Oh no, I mean, yeah, I haven't ever even like sat down and thought about it in that way, but that the fact that like multiple things were telling me to come back to London to train on Savile Row, or just be back in London at that time, and I just followed them, the messages, and I got back. I asked my stepfather if he knew anybody on Savile Row or if he'd had these suits made there, and luckily he had a tailor. So I was introduced to him, but at the time he was sort of unwell and not faring so well, and he decided he wasn't going to continue working in the industry, and he made a kind of vague introduction to the new owner of the house that he was the pattern cutter at, and over email. And I went in, and I think I probably sort of met him and sort of like, Patrick, this is Alexander. He's interested in working on Savile Row in an apprenticeship. Patrick's like, nice to meet you. If you ever need anything or, whatever, here's my card, and let me know when you're ready. And that was that. And I think in that time, people still connected a lot on Facebook. I don't even use Facebook really anymore. So we must have connected on Facebook.
I mean, Facebook is not.
Oh yeah, it says.
Yeah.
Yeah, it said poor connection for me, but you can hear me.
No,
right?
no, I can hear you. Yeah, carry on. Yes, of course.
Oh, yeah. So Patrick, then. So sorry, I'm jumping around a lot. So then I was thinking, well, I'm going to try to figure out how to get a job on Savile Row. It's really actually very difficult to get a job on Savile Row. As much as they need people to come and apprentice and learn the trade on so many levels and different career paths, it's actually extremely tricky to get an apprenticeship. So while I was working on trying to figure out how to get an apprenticeship, I got a job working at Harrods as a personal shopper. That kind of came from the fact that when I was living in LA, having assisted Andre Leon Talley and having also done some other assisting work to other stylists, friends of mine, I sort of was able to kind of clobber together a very vague, not very convincing CV, but at least it said Vogue. And I went to Harrods, and I actually just wanted to get a job working in the personal shopping department, but they thought that I was applying for a personal shopping position, and they gave me the job, and the day later. And I sort of just said, well, look, if I'm going to be making money and I moved back here and I need a job, why not just take it? So I actually spent a year working as a personal shopper at Harrods while it was still owned by Mohammed Al Fayed. And that was, I always say, like the second year of my master's in fashion education, having worked combining the first part of working at Decades and then Andre as my sort of first year, although it was longer than a year, and my second year, which was all focused on retail and ultra high net worth customers and so on, was working at Harrods, which was, I think, probably like one of the funnest years of my life. Just because it was such a crazy, crazy place to work at the time.
Okay, so you were personal shopper in Harrods. Did you somehow met there Tom Ford, like he said to you that I have an office or I live in London? Did you somehow get in touch with him since you went to London?
So I didn't at first because I was sort of I was very focused on the Savile Row thing. And while I was working at Harrods, I started going to school part-time to get what they call in the UK an NVQ, which is a National Vocation Qualification in tailoring, in bespoke tailoring, so that I could use it as a stepping stone to getting a position on Savile Row. And when I was ready to start applying for jobs on Savile Row, I also reached out to Tom Ford and his office. And again, it's like one of those things that just wasn't written in the stars, because we went probably over the course of several months between myself and his assistant at the time, arranging multiple meeting interviews that just never were able to happen because of his travel schedule or sudden things that came up, or that he would, I remember there was one day where after I'd actually started working on Savile Row, that I was really ill for like 5 or 6 days one year, and or in that year, which would have been in 2007 or 8. And I missed an email from his assistant saying, Tom Ford is in London and he'd love to see you if you're available this week. Well, I was in bed sick and I wasn't looking at my email, so I missed it. So it was always like never really written in the stars that anything should have ever happened.
Yeah.
But the thing about the Facebook thing was that eventually, while I was training to, get my MBQ in bespoke tailoring, the owner of the house, Patrick Grant, who's the owner of Norton Sons, sent me a message on Facebook saying, if you're still interested in an apprenticeship, we have a cutting apprenticeship opening, and you're very welcome to come and interview. And so I went through the interview process and I got the job, and I left the program of the studying part-time, and I left Harrods to go work on Savile Row.
Okay, and this is where you're actually your big journey in London as a fashion designer actually starts, right? Like more like a professionally.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that it was, that was my real training. I didn't go to fashion school, but I have the training of a pattern cutter. And a lot of people that go to fashion school don't learn how to cut patterns. They learn how to design as a process. They learn the sort of where to do research and how to get their creative juices flowing and how to be creative. But I wanted to learn in a way that for me felt like if I was going to be a designer 50 years prior, I would have gone to apprentice in a house, in an haute couture house in Paris, to learn the craft of making clothing at that level, as opposed to the craft of necessarily designing the clothing. So it was really the beginning of my professional fashion journey in that sense. And I worked in the bespoke business. We had some amazing customers and clients who, as the rule goes, we don't talk about while they're still alive. So I can't really share them. However, some of the stuff that we did that was also interesting and wasn't just in fashion. Wasn't just bespoke, because we actually did a lot of fashion collaborations with brands like Christopher Kane and Erdem and the Kooples and who else do we do things for? Just like a whole variety, like a lot of London brands, Henry Holland. One of the people though that I did cut a suit for, and he unfortunately has passed away now, was Alexander Lee McQueen. So it was quite an interesting but very rigorous training period. And the apprenticeship is usually 5 years, but the house was so busy and growing so quickly that I had to go through it in about 2 years and finish my apprenticeship 5 years and 2 years and get straight to work. And they also at the same time were launching a men's ready-to-wear business called eTots. So I was working kind of between the bespoke side and the ready-to-wear side of that business. And eventually I decided I wanted to leave entirely to start my own brand, and Patrick asked me to stay but move over to the menswear, ready-to-wear business exclusively as sort of the head of brand and business development, which is sort of, you know, a generalist term for I just sort of ran the show. And that was a really cool time because I think at that moment, London fashion was amazing, but was really having a lot of energy from the menswear side to compete with what they were putting out on the women's wear side. So it was an exciting time to be working like really in the thick of things in the way that I was.
Wow. You mainly, when you first came in London in the Savile Row, it was mainly men's, right? You were working, or and then you jumped to the women's.
Yeah, it was. I mean, you know, I would say 98% of what's made on Savile Row is for men,
Mm-hmm.
but there were female customers that were coming to have clothing made. There were also the collaborations we did with the fashion houses often were for women, not for men. They were for women's wear collections, not for men's wear collections. And that was because, you know, from my feedback that I'd had previously from Andre and from Lisa Love, it was really they felt I should go down a menswear route.
I mean, I've seen a video of you on YouTube. It was, I think it was back in 2014. That costume that you're wearing, oh my God, that was. I mean, in the advertising or something like an interview of you, it was really, really, really amazing suit. I can say. I can
Oh,
say.
I don't even know which video that is.
Yeah, yeah, it was
Fun
back
fact,
in the
though,
years.
if you
Yeah.
were, I don't know if it's my name is attached to it, but there's a video on YouTube that has like 2.2 million views, which is nothing in the greater scheme of things on, you know, YouTube. But for me, it's it's me showing people how 5 ways a gentleman can tie a scarf, and it's the most viewed how to tie a scarf video on YouTube. So it's kind of like one of those ridiculous internet
Uh,
things that exist.
I have to look for it. I haven't seen it, to be honest. I have to look for it because I've
It's
seen.
not. It's not. My name isn't attached to it,
Ah,
which is why
okay,
it works.
okay.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna search for like how to tie a scarf. Then probably it's gonna
Yeah, it will
pop
come up
up.
exactly. Yeah.
So after the Savile Row experience, what was then? How you end up here in the company that you are?
So okay, so after Savile Row and after the menswear business, I decided I was ready to start my own business. But I also felt at that time that I was really, really still drawn and pulled to working with women's wear. But I felt that I had a really interesting kind of like tactic, bringing together tailoring and menswear nuances with women's wear, and also at the time, only the really biggest fashion houses and biggest brands were doing pre-collections for resort and pre-fall. And I felt there was a major opportunity in the market to essentially launch myself as a pre-collections brand. So I was pretty much the first business, the first designer brand to do that. I'm not saying I am the first because there could have been somebody else that did it, but I think I was probably the first to do that as like the core business of, you know, core ethos of my business, and my business plan was based on that, and it got me a lot of attention and really, really great press, and I got amazing stores from the first season as a result of this, and I really kind of like filled a hole in the market that, you know, I just saw, and I felt like it was the way to go, and it was very quick the whole time working. You know, I started off just doing 2 collections a year. Everything was made in London except for my knitwear, which was made by hand in Wales. And I was very conscious of having a sustainable business without ever talking about sustainability, because it really wasn't part of the conversation at the time, but it was sort of starting. And I just felt like if I can see the factory where my clothing is made, if I can take the tube to get there and not, you know, even pick up the production myself and carry it home with like an assistant, or the biggest shipping would be coming from Wales to London on sort of a, you know, like DHL truck. It was, to me, like the most sustainable I could make the business. And it grew quickly, and it was popular with private client business in particular, it was early days for it to sort of really succeed on a wholesale business, because I was only offering pre-collections. And while the buyers and the stores had 70% of their budget assigned to pre-collections, they still really put that 30% left into bringing in new brands and the fanfare and publicity that comes along with the main seasons of spring, summer, autumn, winter in, March and September. So it was a struggle, but I had a really amazing private client business that I was able to build up. And at a certain point, it really, really overtook my wholesale business to kind of be the driving force of my brand. And knitwear also was the real driving force within my brand. And at a point, it came to being almost 70% it was from the very first season, over 50% of my business was knitwear. And by my last season, it was more like knitwear with some additional things to make sure that you weren't naked. And at that time as well, however, I came to the realization, that I needed to stop. Things were going really well. I'd moved it over to a direct-to-consumer pretty much business, with only a few stores that were really there as like a marketing, expense. And I had this sort of like come to Jesus moment, I guess, one day when I was doing my showroom in Paris. I had a terrible experience with a blogger, and it was really like the one time, it was one of many episodes that happened throughout the time that I had my business and throughout, the entirety of my experience working in fashion. But it was the one final straw that broke the camel's back, as it were, because I just felt like I don't see myself being the person that I had to be that day in order to service and take care of a blogger who really didn't deserve the time of day that I was giving to them. But I was bending over backwards and really suffering on the inside by virtue of what was being demanded of me. And I thought to myself, as amazing as everything is right now and how great I feel about the business, I think it's time to stop. So I took a month just thinking about it. That was October. I took actually maybe like almost 6 weeks, I suppose, until the end of November. And then I was visiting my family for Thanksgiving in the States, and talking to my dad, I decided, it's done. I'm really, really done. I'm going to close my business now, and I'm going to take some time to figure out what I'm going to do next. And I'd realized that I wasn't enjoying myself anymore was the main thing. I was not the first person in the office every morning. I was not the last one to leave. I was not really on top of things and enthused about things. I was sort of dragging my feet, doing the minimum amount of effort required for everything to continue sort of sailing on as necessary. So I decided that. I went back to London and I told my team that unfortunately that was what was happening. The business was going to close. They all had 3 months notice. They were either allowed to leave straight away if that felt better to them, or they could stay and work work through the rest of the time. And And the crazy part is, like, in that time, we did some amazing, amazing projects in those last 3 months. And it felt great because I had previously dressed lots of different celebrities throughout the time that I had my business, and made custom-made items for different, actresses and singers, and worked with various different stylists, and made costumes for movies, and like loads of things that, you expect or would think of in a sort of fashion business that you may have the opportunity to do if you're on that particular type of, business trajectory. And one of the people that obviously, being in fashion and at that time and younger than I am now, although I still would say I love her, was Lady Gaga. I had the opportunity to dress her for an audition that she did for a movie that I don't think she got the role in that film, but she wore a look that I had sent for her to wear. And so I was always on the radar of her stylists. And then her stylist contacted me and asked me if I would make her a suit that she could wear for for her Joanne album sort of lead single, Million Pieces. and it was a pink suit that they wanted to be made in a sort of country western style for her. And so I did that, and they loved it, and they said, great, can you make us 3 more identical suits? Which I did. And then they said, great, we love this so much, can you make us 10 more identical suits? So I made them, because they go through, like, shooting music videos and whatnot, they go through them, they get damaged, whatever happens, and then the next follow-up music video was a follow-on from that original one, where she is kind of like a zombie, I think, and she's been like through Armageddon or something, and so she's wearing a suit, the same suit, but it's like been like torn to shreds, so you can hardly tell that it's the suit, but they needed so many versions of it for like the storyline to have continuity. And so the last thing I did really with my own business was like make these 14 suits for Lady Gaga that she wore. And, at that time it was kind of like her relaunching album, and it was everywhere, that pink suit with the pink hat. And then my business closed, and people were like, what? How did that happen? Like, I don't understand. You just you just dressed Lady Gaga, you did the clothes, you made the suit for her music video. Like, how's this? What are you thinking? And I was like, well, I'm done, go out on a high, as they say. So that was the end of that. And let me think. That was in the spring of 2017. And I took about 9 months off from work to just reset myself and kind of find, a happy place again within myself. I spent a lot of time like assessing what I want to do, what I want to be, what makes me happy, just traveling. I spent the 9 months saying yes to a lot of things. I wasn't like saying yes to anything crazy, but if somebody said like, oh, do you want to go for dinner? I'd say yes. Do you want to go away for the weekend? I'd say yes. My partner, travels a lot. He works in the art world. So he would just say, do you want to come to this fair? Do you want to go to this show? Do you want to come and see this exhibition? I was just saying yes to everything that I felt was like a creative outlet. Or some kind of potential inspiration for something. And it was really, really great. And I do feel like I got myself back to an extent. At the end of the 9 months, the Patrick Grant, who owned the tailoring house where I had originally trained on Savile Row, contacted me and asked me if I was looking for a job. No, he didn't ask me if I was looking for a job. I ran into him, and then he contacted me after we ran into each other to say there was a job that he thought I would be perfect for. He knew I wasn't working and that I'd closed my business. And I thought about it, and I wasn't really sure I should do it, but I decided, I'll do it for a year and see what happens. It would be a great way for me to get my feet, wet again and just see what's happening in the market. So I actually ended up back on Savile Row, running the tailoring house this time, not as a pattern cutter, but sort of like as the business director. And I kind of took it as an opportunity to like do the work that I needed to do there. It's very regimented on Savile Row. It's 9 to 5, nothing before and nothing after. It's no weekends. It's very kind of old school in that way. So I had a lot of additional time that I hadn't really had working for myself for 7 years. And I started meditating. I started doing transcendental meditation, which I don't know if you know anything about that.
Yeah. I don't know, yes.
So I started doing that, and it really made like a huge difference for me. And I started just doing all these other little like creative things that I felt would help me. I did a weaving course to learn how to weave on a loom, since when I had my brand, all the cloth that I used, like 90% of the cloth that I used, I designed and had woven on jacquard looms for the collection. So I didn't make it, but I was very involved in that kind of side of the business. And it was something that I felt very close to, and I really wanted to do something with my hands and be tactile in a creative way. So I just, was doing things alongside it. And one of the things that had happened while I had my own brand was that a friend of mine from university's husband had started a women's hosiery brand at the time called Heist, which still exists. It's a women's sort of undergarment and hosiery company. And he had left or stepped back from working there and asked me to meet to talk about some ideas he was having about a new business. And that was where what I do now started to come up, which is Sheep Ink.
Mm-hmm. 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 Talk a little bit about this company because I think they're doing something interesting with the clothes.
Yeah, so we had a lot of discussions about like what it could be to start a new business in the fashion industry, what it meant to start a business in the environment that we're in now with the climate crisis. And uh, also, I had always been, as I said, conscious of what it meant to be sustainable, but I also wasn't necessarily sustainable in the way that I could have been or I could now be at the time that this conversation was happening. And so Edzard had a son recently and was suddenly, very focused on sustainability. And because he had his own business in the fashion industry, he was very acutely aware of the downfalls and where the problems were. And essentially, he wanted to start a fully sustainable business that was carbon negative, and we examined various ways to do this and forms of business and products that we could launch this with. And instead we ended up landing on knitwear, and specifically merino wool knitwear, and really focused on the idea of examining every part of the supply chain and the product to make it as sustainable as we possibly could, which is now where we are. So it's 10 times carbon negative. And we've been in business now for about a year and 4 months, or a year and 5 months, something like that. I'm not one of the co-founders. It's Edzard and Michael who are the two co-founders, but I'm the head of design or head of product there. So I've been working with them since the beginning, and it's really a fascinating and amazing company, but also time to be working in the fashion industry in the way that we are doing.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting project. I haven't seen anything like it before. So I've seen your website. I've seen a couple of a conversation that happened recently with the co-founders and you. So yeah, I think it's something really interesting. But it's mainly for ladies or it's for men as well.
No, it's actually it's non-gendered or
Yeah,
unisex,
yeah.
and that comes down to like our belief that for clothing to be truly sustainable, there can't really be gendered clothing, because
Mm-hmm.
you need to be able to potentially share it with somebody else or not limit the resale economy. If you choose to sell it, it shouldn't be something that only half the population can buy. And we focused in on the idea that like a crew neck in merino wool was probably as sustainable as we could get to start with. And it could be perceived as slightly boring and the colors slightly stayed, but we wanted to build a really solid base that we could then develop off of and bring in color stories, collaborations, additions, all these things based off of a really solid foundation. So we started with the crew neck. We added a lightweight crew neck after that, a V-neck, a cardigan, a beanie. We've done one edition, which was actually with myself as a designer, not because my name isn't really attached to the brand in that way. And so now we have 2 more editions coming this year with other designers, one from the UK and one from the Netherlands. And then we have other things in progress too, but always conscious of like what it means to be, a unisex company. It's a really interesting conversation that I enjoy having, because I always try to ask the question, or at least draw attention to the fact that when brands talk about unisex clothing, generally speaking, it comes from the perspective of either female designed, male appropriated, or the reverse, male led design, female appropriated. So the boyfriend jean, well, there's no such thing as a girlfriend jean, but why isn't there such a thing as a girlfriend jean? Or the granddad vest or sweater, whatever that may be. So these pieces of clothing that women are encouraged through trends or fashion to start wearing are still gendered as masculine. And this is something that like we're really conscious of looking at, and I constantly like ask this question of myself and of the team, like what does it mean to have non-gendered design led clothing? What does that look like? And it's really tricky because I don't actually think it exists yet, really.
Yeah, that's
So
why
it's
it's
something.
really interesting. I mean, I've seen your website, and it was like a, as you say, like more like unisex, no gender. I was like, okay, and it's also like, the thing with the carbon, and I was like, okay, that's really really, first time I've seen. Although I'm not in the fashion world, but I'm looking here and there, but it was really really interesting, the project.
Yes, I think, yeah, and I definitely think also when you look at the brand at the moment, it does have a slight appearance of being male led because, it is, I design it, I'm a man. I see myself as a man. My pronouns, I don't often, use that terminology, but I say I'm he, I'm a
Yes,
he,
yeah, yeah,
and so on, he, him. So I obviously have some kind of imprint that I'm going to make when I design, um, even though I've previously designed for women and I am conscious of how to design for women and I know how to do that. We still are, designing clothing that is supposed to work for men and women, but it looks like masculine clothing. And so it's not just enough to sort of do the reverse and do things with female-led design and then just stick them on a guy. Like it's not enough to just
yeah.
make a knit dress but photograph it on a man and say that's for men too. It's really much more about looking at how we can really from the beginning approach design without it feeling like it's been gendered, and it's extremely difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Makes more sense. There's a lot of women that they can say like, I would, I'm fascinating, or I like to wear more like a masculine kind of, like men's kind of clothes. So there's women that I like to wear like masculine fragrances as well. I've noticed, and I've seen a lot of women that actually can go more to boys kind of style thing than, as you say, exactly the opposite for a man to go more to a female in a clothing style.
Right.
I would like to ask you what were your early fashion influence like?
My early fashion influences.
Yes.
So my okay, so the earliest memory that I actually have of something to do with fashion is when I lived in San Francisco and I was very young. My mother used to go shopping on the weekends at Saks Fifth Avenue or Neiman Marcus or like these sort of upscale stores. I don't know if she was buying anything, but she was definitely taking me with her into these shops. And while she'd be trying things on, sometimes she would bring my best friend at the time, Lisa Fike, and the two of us would go and we would sort of be sitting outside the dressing room. But instead of just like sitting outside the dressing room, we used to play in the evening wear department at these department stores. And they used to have these like circular racks with all the gowns hanging around them or whatever the brand's dresses were like hanging to the floor. And we would crawl inside them and it would like be like almost being like in some kind of like missile silo. And we would collect sequins or bugle beads or whatever the dresses had embroidered on them that had fallen off onto the floor and collect them while my mom was shopping or trying clothes on. So that's my first fashion related memory, which is sort of an unusual one, but it's definitely there. And then the other thing is that I just remember always my mother would get her nails done, on the weekend, and she'd always be very well put together, and she had like the big 80s hair. My grandmother was the same. She always wore brooches. My mother's mother, so my maternal grandmother, always wore like a belt, like a waist belt over whatever she was wearing, and a scarf around her neck tied like on the side, and like amazing sunglasses. So there was always like just these hyper stylized women around me. And then I think because of that, and because my parents were quite interested in style as well, it just trickled down, and I was always kind of like the little kid that was sort of like styled, like in acid wash jeans and Reebok high tops and like a crazy shirt with like a cool hat in 1989 in San Francisco. So, yeah, I have really very early memories of things to do with fashion.
Okay. So you say back in the years, you said that your style was uh, more like a casual Americanist European touch. Is that changed now, or that's your style since back then?
Do you mean my personal style or like my
Yeah,
design style?
yeah. I mean,
So my
yeah.
personal style has gone through so many changes over the years. Because at that time I was being dressed by my mother or my dad. So, um, I didn't really have a choice, but I suppose my mother being hyper style, literate herself meant that I looked like I was. But at the same time, they dressed me quite preppy, too, especially around my grandparents and I went to, these very traditional schools where I had to wear a blazer and shorts to school with a tie and such, and like penny loafers. So I really grew up like that was, the daytime for me, and the rest of the time I had this kind of like kids boy band slash Disney actor vibe going on, I suppose. Then when I moved to the UK, it did start to shift, and I really, really became personally invested in fashion living in London. And um, I went to boarding school here in the UK as well, from the age of 9. And when I was at Harrow, and we would wear our school uniform, but whenever you weren't at class and it wasn't school time, you were allowed to put on your own clothes. And you really would see kids starting to experiment with style. And I was in the closet and I wasn't really comfortable in myself, but I was very comfortable with experimenting with fashion somehow, which, I don't know. I obviously like had no conscience of what I looked like to other people because I thought I was in the closet, but I'm sure my clothing said otherwise. And I really experimented a lot with like flares and bell bottoms and like wearing like super baggy wide leg trousers and then like a really tight top, or then I would wear like really tight corduroys with like a baggy sweater and t-shirt, and I went through the whole like dressing like Ross from Friends stage with a t-shirt and a v-neck sweater for years. And I was really into sneakers and stuff, but I definitely didn't dress like the other kids at school. And yeah, now my style is much more, I'm very into like technical clothing. So
Okay.
like technical sportswear and then like very luxe, or conservative.
Okay. How about the? I'm really interested to find about your postcard that you have. The stories that you have in your website. Is this all the place that you've been, that you travel?
Is this on the Alexander Lewis website?
Yes.
Oh, so what I did that was when I had my brand still. I used to do a thing which was called postcards from my girlfriends,
Mm-hmm.
and I would ask friends of mine that were traveling or that lived elsewhere whenever they, to send me a postcard. And actually, there's an Instagram account which is still there, so it's kind of like an archive of this called Postcards from My Girlfriends. And it was very simple. I would just say, if you're going somewhere, oh, can you just send me an email, please, with, one thing that's a tip of something to do in the place that you're in, one tip about what you would wear or pack in your bag, and try to include something Alexander Lewis,
Okay.
basically,
Okay.
as it was like a marketing strategy. And so they would send it, and then I would post it on Instagram, and it would go on the website as kind of like a journal. And I've always loved travel, so it really played into this idea of like also having a bit of a travel guide for the world of Alexander Lewis, for the
Yeah.
woman
I
of
really,
Alexander
I
Lewis.
really loved it. I really like it. I mean, even the the photos as well are really fascinating. It was some places from Greece as well. So
Yes, well, the
yes,
very first one I think was from a friend of mine, Eva Fakatselis, who went to Amorgos, and so
yeah.
her postcard was from Amorgos.
I mean, even your accent is not that bad. Saying saying Greek amorgos, for example, it's not that
Thank you.
bad. So I'm curious, what inspires you the most?
um, I really think it's everything that I get when it really travel really inspires me, and exposure to other cultures and sounds and languages and food and clothing and just all of the sort of stimuli that happen when you're outside of your normal environment. Um, every collection that I used to design was really based on a trip. Every season had a very specific inspiration behind it, whether it was a trip to a beach in Brazil or a trip to Tokyo or a trip to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, or where else? No, I'm forgetting everything I did, or like a skiing trip or something like that. So it was really like I would do a lot of research about everything I could possibly find to do with the location.
Hmm. Hmm. What's your favorite destination you've been so far? What was your, I mean,
Tokyo.
Tokyo, right? Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay. Why is that?
Um, I think it's just this place that I've always been fascinated by before I'd even ever been there. I just loved anything Japanese. I have a Japanese dog called Rio. He's a Shiba Inu. I've always just liked the culture and art from Japan, like in this sort of traditional sense. And obviously, they have like an incredible history of fashion and culturally creative energy. Um, and when I got to go there for the first time, it was like everything that I had wished it could possibly be and more. And afterwards, I decided to start learning Japanese because I also love the Olympics. And this was 3 years ago, so we decided to start learning Japanese so that we'd be able to, get around without too much problems at the Summer Olympics that didn't happen last year. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. I mean,
So I'm a Japanophile, you could say.
so you know some Japanese, I assume.
I do, but I'm so, I haven't been, well, when was the last time I was in Japan? Probably in early 2019. Yeah, was the last time I was there. And I'd been learning Japanese at that time for a year. And it was amazing to go and have the little Japanese that I had became so much in a really short period of time. But
Okay.
now, obviously, I haven't been back. We have our lessons over Zoom. I use Duolingo. It's very difficult to really excel at a foreign language unless you're using it regularly.
Well, I assume it's more difficult than Brazilian.
It's definitely harder than that. It's
Yeah.
probably closer, in terms of a difficulty to something like Greek because it's a completely different alphabet.
Yes, that's true. That's true. That's true. Um, what was your biggest challenge in your life and how you overcome it?
Um,
Something that
yeah, I think one of my biggest challenges, and I think I'm still overcoming it, but it would just be myself. Usually I think when you're a creative individual and you're really drawn to anything that, any kind of career in the creative fields, you are dealing a lot with your inner critic and your inner saboteur. And I think I've had some great triumphs over it. And one of those I would say was closing my business. I really wholeheartedly think that was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my whole life. I'm only 35, so hopefully I'm going to have other great decisions to come. I know I have had other great decisions, but I would say that decision probably saved me a lot of pain and upset and sorrow. And I feel so good about having made that decision to close my business for myself, as opposed to, it being a decision that I had to close it because of extenuating circumstances or outside factors that drove it to be something that I had to close. So
because usually it hurts, when start your own business, your own company, and then you decide to 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 get out from it. And when you were about to get out from it, then you were designed the Lady Gaga kind of clothes, and you were like still saying like, you know what, no, that's it, it's done. I mean, because I've been there, Alexander. It's not easy. I'm kind of I'm kind of in where you were there with your company. I'm kind of in the same situation right now. I have a company, and then there's a lot of issues that are going on, and it's. But I think what I realize is that sometimes even things that you love, you have to let them go. So the future probably is going to be even better than the one that you actually create by yourself. So.
Definitely. I mean, people always say, like, even like friendships, if you get rid of the bad friendships, you make room for the good, for new, better friendships. And I think it's like that everything in your life. If you have a bad career or something bad, a bad job that makes you unhappy, and you are brave enough to get rid of it, you're making room in your life for something better to replace it.
Definitely. What success looks like in your life? What is success for you? What this looks like, Alexander World?
I think my mind changes on this all the time, but I would say for me, success really looks like having a really healthy relationship with yourself, having healthy relationships with those around you, and being able to find moments of joy and pride and the small feelings of success. I think if you're able to have small continual moments where you feel like you've been successful, you will always feel successful, regardless of whether you have some major moment to look back on at some point and say, oh, I did that, at least I did that, but then what about the rest of your life? But if you're able to have small moments that you've conquered, or that you've really surprised yourself or others, or managed to be happy about different things, and they're happening all the time, that I think is success.
Did you have in your life a lot of small success, or you can be like feel like you've been successful, or you have more like a big ones, and then you were feeling like
Well, I think I used to be super focused on the big ones, and I think I'm not as focused on the big ones now, and I feel more successful in managing or taking care of myself in that way, because I'm not so focused on these sort of potentially unattainable but definitely difficult to attain moments. And instead, every day I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for from the day before in the morning in my diary. Or if I decide to, work on something for 5 minutes, and instead I work on it for half an hour, these kinds of things, or eating better, taking care of my body and my mind, like all of those sorts of things I feel like are really important successes that lead to the feeling of success, and not chasing the big successes because I'm always having small successes.
I will keep that in mind with the small successes, because I never kind of think about the success like that. And I think that you're right. Sometimes when you're after the big successes, then but when you have small success, sometimes you ignore them, and then you realize that you realize that most of the time the small successes is actually more it keeps more in balance than to have a big one and then you go down, you know what I mean? So
Definitely.
yes. How are you dealing with failures in your life?
Well, I mean, I think that the closing of my business is a great example, because it would be perceived as a failure to have, my business is gone, but it was my own decision. I owned the decision to close my business, and I've felt great, and I still feel great about that. And I think it's about sort of, flipping the failure on its head and learning from it, or taking a positive from it. I mean, it sounds like everybody says the exact same thing about failure, but I don't, because I feel like I look at the small successes, and because I feel like I'm not so focused on climbing impossible mountains, I'm also not having major failures. it's not that I'm not challenging myself or that I'm not striving to do more, but I'm not setting myself tasks that whatever happens, I will consider them to be a failure. And that is the relationship with your inner saboteur, inner critic taking over. So if I was saying like, by the end of this year, I need to do whatever, have a company that I grow from nothing and I sell it to a VC, and then we IPO it by January next year and we raised $1 billion, like I'll probably consider whatever happens in that state a failure. But if I'm setting myself tasks that I feel are within my reach, and then when I reach them, I set a new task or a new goal, and I have those and I can count those as all successes, then I'm never going to be really sort of cut up or, feel downtrodden because I didn't have this major moment that I would then consider a failure for not having attained.
So we have more like a small goals, like more reachable, as you say, than to have one big one, like one huge.
Well, I still have big goals and big dreams and things that are like way beyond, but I litter the path to that with other goals and small attainable successes. And if I don't manage to do something this year or in these 6 months, then I move it to the next 6 months or the next year.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Who is your hero? What qualities makes them your choice?
My fear, or did you say hero or fear?
Who is your hero?
My hero.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And what qualities makes them your choice of that person? It's your mother, it's your partner in life, of course, I think you have a lot of influence from your mother since you were a little boy, but now that you're going back in general in your life, who was, the one that you were admiring and, you're my hero?
I don't know if I ever think of people as heroes, to be honest, but I do think of people that I know, that I see as having become successful by whatever the, measurement that they are being measured by, whether it's themselves or other people. And that to me is amazing when I see, somebody that was just in the room before, Marisha, she and I went to university together. She is, I think, like sort of like internationally considered the handstand queen. She's like a very world-renowned yoga instructor. So that's amazing, and that wasn't what she started off doing, and that wasn't where her career path was sort of headed towards in the very beginning, but it's ended up where she's gotten to, and I think that's incredible. Or other friends of mine that have found equal levels of success that are, just remarkable to me. And what I think is an amazing feature of those people is perseverance. All of them have perseverance.
Definitely, perseverance is it's something that I think all the successful people have, and they should have.
It's like a combination of perseverance and self-belief.
Yeah, 100%. Self-belief, and then I think self-awareness
as well. Yes, for sure.
So you didn't have, even if you're like a little boy or a little bit older than a boy, like an idol, like you someone even in the fashion industry later on, someone you like, what, I want to be like him, like an idol, someone that you really wanted to.
When I was younger, the person for me that was the be all end all in fashion was John Galliano.
Oh, okay. I think I'm not sure. I read in the past a John Galliano T-shirt back in Greece. It was a really interesting moment in my life. But yeah, because I had a couple of friends in the fashion in Greece, and they were really, really picky, and they really like your mother, for example, always in style and stuff. So yeah, no Galliano kind of clothes, and it was really interesting back in the days. So what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of my relationship.
Okay. All of them, or the current one?
No, my current one. I'm
okay.
Engaged, and my partner. That's the thing that I'm most proud of is being engaged to him and our relationship.
Okay. I mean, yeah,
Definitely.
of course, being engaged with someone, that means, of course, you have to be proud of, no matter what.
Of course.
Otherwise, yeah, what's
I mean, my proudest moment was actually proposing,
okay.
but yeah, so I guess it would make sense that then I would be most proud of
Mm-hmm.
the relationship too.
Mm-hmm. Yes, 100%, 100%. Uh, how have your priorities changed over time?
um, well, I guess when I was younger, I used to obviously want to go clubbing, and I was always interested in being at every party and never missing an event at the opening of an envelope. But I wasn't far off of it. And it's funny. When I was 27, it literally flipped on its head. I just had no interest anymore in chasing the nightlife or any of those things. I wanted to get much more serious, and yeah. So my priorities really changed, and then over time they keep changing. And like I said, when I closed my business, my priorities changed from chasing the business and the industry to taking care of myself. And then even now with COVID, I'm very focused on taking care of myself still, but also my relationship and taking care of what I have that makes me happy in my life. So my priorities have, I suppose, changed quite a lot, but at the same time, some of the people that have been in my life are still, it's like, since I was 13, are still probably the core people in my life. And the people that I became friends with in LA are still very much the core people in my life. And so I guess I have a loyalty thing that has never gone away.
So do you believe that can we actually trust nowadays? Because you talk about loyalty. I don't know if you've been heartbroken other for partners, obviously, but I don't know how that changed you when it comes to trust and to be loyal.
Mm,
I mean, you're the same person when it comes to loyalty and trust as you were, I don't know, like 5 or 10 years ago.
no, I guess I'm not, because I probably don't give trust out as easily as I used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to protect that as like something to be cherished, I suppose. And I think that I used to be loyal to a fault. Like I would just always see past whatever problems there were, or I would always kind of explain away or find a reason for something.
Mm-hmm.
But there's people in my life that are not in my life anymore, because I decided that, other things became more important than that kind of sense of loyalty or duty when they made no sense anymore. Um, and it is difficult to walk away from those friendships at times and the relationships, but I think you make choices in life, and they are supposed to be the choices that are to better yourself, or to put yourself first, and that just means that things change over time, and that's okay.
Well, things change over time, of course, and I think that choices define us as well.
Definitely.
So yeah, how do you? Because you talk about friendships and stuff. How have you ever broken someone's heart?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
uh, I think if the person's heart cannot be broken for whatever reason, then no, I haven't. But
So you didn't
possibly,
get. So
now
you.
I'm thinking back, I think maybe I've broken somebody's heart, yes.
Okay. Okay. How did you feel about? Did you actually notice that in that moment, or you realize it after?
I mean, I was told it in the moment, I guess, but I think, the reason why I didn't think it was real was because I didn't think that the person was actually, not only their heart was there to be broken, I think that they thought that they had a heart to be broken, but they didn't. But
Okay.
perhaps I really did, because, who's to say? It's not for me to say whether that person was being honest or not in
Mm-hmm.
that sense.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't spoken to the person in like 15 years. So
Okay. Okay. Uh, how? What does your ideal life look like? I mean, in your mind, what's the ideal life that you want to live? How would that, how does it look like in your world?
I still want to work. I don't want to not be working. I do want to work, but I also want to be able to balance that with travel and with my family, my relationship, and doing the things that really make me happy, and not, having to not be able to do stuff that makes me happy because there's an imbalance in my life. And I think that for most people, those imbalances really come from either a relationship or from a professional, you know, relationship or work life. And I think that balance is really important to me. So right now I work, I'm actually studying as well. I have time for my relationship. I have time for myself. And so I feel like I do have quite a good balance of.
You think you have so much time for yourself and for your relationship because of the COVID, or you think since if after the COVID finished the situation, you think you will be more busy, or you can think you can balance as well?
No, I think that it will be pretty much the same. I mean, the time that I make for myself, besides the fact of doing TM twice a day, which is 40 minutes just for myself, which is more than some people have at all, is, a really big factor. But then after that, I have, I'm conscious of making the time for my relationship, for myself, for my work life, and doing all those things kind of in equal parts. I think, there can be like an amplification of things, or there could be like a sort of, I wouldn't say lessening, but like, turning down the volume on certain things, but it would all be in harmony.
Now that you say harmony and stuff, how do you recharge yourself?
Well, definitely with the meditation. Going for walks outside. I always go for walks, because I have a dog, so I have to walk the dog, which is great. A great excuse to be outside, but it means like going to nature. And I really feel probably the most recharged in nature, either with the ocean on a beach or in the mountains, at the extremes.
That will be in the USA or in Bahia.
Exactly. I mean, both of those, but also, I love going to Greece. But I also like, I'm happy in Switzerland in a mountain range, or these different places. I'm not so into like flat rolling countryside hills. I want there to be some kind of like dramatic edge of the earth experience.
Yeah, I think we have the same. Either I'm gonna like the ocean or the sea or the mountain. So yeah, I think that because I grew up in mountains, so that makes sense for me. So where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Having your own company completely like before, something new, something that.
Well, I still have my own company on the side, and I'm doing a couple small little projects that are really there for like my creative juices to flow. And I really would like to continue doing that. I also would really enjoy continuing to work for Sheep Inc. in this way that I work for them, and I do consult for other people as well. So those sort of like that kind of blend of working for myself, working for other people, consulting, and being part of a bigger picture brand like Sheep Inc. is really important to me, and I would like to keep that. I think
Living
I'm
in
always
London.
just trying to like become a better version of myself,
Okay.
So whatever that may look like, it's just about, saying, okay, it's kind of like cooking. And I'm like working on the same recipe over and over again. So I'm fine tuning it with like, okay, so now I need to work on salt or the pepper, or it needs a bit more spice or some acid or something like that. It's about finding like the correct balance in the dish.
I like the food example.
Well, I love food, so
Yeah.
it's an easy one for me.
So going. What advice you will give to yourself, being in 5 years time ahead? 5 years time ahead. Like for example, I'm gonna make it like in two parts. You are in 5 years, let's say 2026. What advice you will give Alexander 2026 to Alexander 2021?
What would Alexander 26 give to 21? Okay,
Yes.
got it.
So you're 2026.
Yeah, so my
What you want?
40-year-old self to
Yeah.
my 35-year-old self.
So what you want to have actually to be, and then what you will tell to Alexander now that it has to do to be that guy.
That's actually a much harder question than what people normally ask, which is like, what would you tell to your teenage self or to your 2-year-old self or something like that? That's what we like to ask people when Melise, who's here, and I do our room. But this is a much harder question. We're taking notes, Melise. But I think, gosh, I mean, I think I would say to myself that I'm on the right track. Mm-hmm. I just have to get past the end of COVID, and you know, get back to a place where I'm able to find like the inspiration and the sort of creative energy in the way that I was before. It's really key and a really important part of like feeding my soul, as it were, is like where I get my inspiration and, you know, creative energy from. And I think that it's really lacking, and I feel that more than anything else at the moment. So I guess that my 40-year-old self would be saying to me, like, just hold in there. It's not too much longer, and keep on keeping on, I suppose, in that sense. Yeah.
And then let's go to reverse. And then what will you say to Alexander 5 years ago, 2016? Where he was somewhere stuck doing something, and then 2021, what you will say to him so he will carry on, or you know?
I think I would say to that version of myself.
Did Alexander change a lot since then to now?
Yeah, I've changed a lot. I would say to that version of myself that stop listening to the wrong people. Mm-hmm. And listen to myself more, and to stop caring about what other people think, and care about, you know, what I want and what I want for myself and how I feel more. Mm-hmm. And I mean, luckily, I think that's kind of what sort of started to happen, you know, when I closed my business. But I think that would have been right in the crux of me not being aware and observant. And so that's what I would tell that person, is like, get out of here now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can see what you mean. What is the one thing that you want to accomplish in your life? Just one thing. What is the thing that you want to actually be successful at it and to accomplish it?
I mean, there's something that I have in the back of my mind that I just want to, like, you know, find a way to work on at some point one day. I feel like I'm working towards it, but I'm not there yet. But I would love one day to have a space for really sort of like tweens and teenagers that are LGBTQIA plus, to express themselves creatively in whatever form of creativity they want to explore, but really focused on like creative arts. I think, you know, there are a lot of arts and creative programs at schools, of course, but I think, reflecting on my own experience of being in schools that had great resources for me to use, somehow I still wasn't comfortable to make use of them, and I still felt judged, and I still felt like I was being stared at, or all these things that made me very uncomfortable in myself, but also held me back from exploring who I was creatively to the fullest extent. So I'd love one day to have a kind of center or, you know, foundation facility, something like that really was almost like a trusted space for kids to come to basically discover themselves through creativity.
Okay, that's good. So in regards to that, what you will change if somehow you have the you know, the ability in the fashion design schools? What you will do different if you can somehow, you know, change kind of the way that, you know, the students are learning the fashion design?
It's hard for me to say because I didn't go to fashion school, so I don't really know everything about how it works. Okay. But I believe that there's sort of still being taught an old school version of the fashion industry
Mm-hmm.
that is sort of setting them up for disaster. But I don't know because I'm not
Yeah.
involved and I didn't go.
Okay. What would you say to all the people who want to be, to be in the fashion industry? What advice you will give?
I would say to them that they really need to focus on what it is that they're going to be offering and why, and then find the people that want that. I always tell people there's like over 7 billion people on this planet, so there's room for everybody to have a business. There's room for everybody to go into whatever kind of creative business they want. They just have to find that customer. And I mean, in today's world, there's more and more and more tools available to give people the opportunity to find them.
Okay. Now that you say that, another question came in my mind. Have you ever find? Have you have you ever answered all the whys of your life in your life? Have you ever answered, like, we all sometimes we sit down and we say, like, why I'm in that company, why I'm doing what I'm doing? Have you answered all the whys in your life?
No, I'm sure I haven't.
Okay. Okay, I think that's something that comes with experience, or you never have it sit down and realize.
Well, I don't think I would. I mean, I don't think I would ever be finished.
Okay, okay, but obviously you have some answers of why, as why you're doing what you're doing, and why, for example, you are in a relationship that you are. Obviously.
Yeah, I
Okay.
have some answers, but there will always be new things that will, deserve or require the question. So come back to me in 40 years.
Uh, let's say 5 years where you're gonna be 40. uh, what is one thing you want to accomplish 2021 this year?
I just want to keep it together.
Okay. So it's more like
So,
it's more like a mentally to you think.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Uh, you have the 2, 3. I don't know how many podcasts you are in a club room. So you have one with Alessandro on Sundays.
Yep.
You have one on Monday, which is like fashion, mental kind of discussion that you do.
With Melise, who's
With
here. Exactly. We host that
Melis.
one together. Yeah.
And there's something else that you do in club room, or something that's
Yeah, and then on Fridays at the moment with Sheep Inc., we do a room where we discuss kind of the future of fashion and sustainability, or just really the future of fashion from different angles. And various different people from the company are involved, and then anybody can join in. Last week we did it as a Wouldn't It Be Cool session. About what is the future of clothing. It's something that we do in the business often to sort of just brainstorm. So we just wanted to have like a total open platform brainstorm. Anybody could take part. So those are the kind of like 3 things that I do at the moment on Clubhouse. So Friday, Sunday, Monday. But, I dive into other rooms here and there and see what's going on. There's so much interesting, so many different interesting things happening in conversations.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Clubhouse is getting bigger and bigger, and so many interesting things around. I remember now that you said about the Friday, you have like a title on that room that was saying, like, just gave us your most crazy idea or something when it comes to fashion that probably is not there yet. Did you ever heard anything like really weird that was from someone?
Usually it comes from me.
Okay.
The most out there ideas. So,
What was the idea that you brought up when it comes to
well, I
fashion?
guess, I don't know. Last week I just said, wouldn't it be cool if, clothing was interconnected? So if I wanted to send somebody else a hug, and if I hugged myself, then like the piece of clothing that somebody, I don't know, in Brazil was wearing a sweater that was connected to my sweater would feel the hug suddenly on their body.
Okay, wow. Wow, you went really far.
It's not that far away though, in reality.
Really?
Yeah, because the Apple Watches already have that, or the
Uh,
iPhone already has the ability to like send your heartbeat to other people. So
yeah, that's true. That's true.
um,
That's true.
it sounds crazy, but actually, a lot of the craziest things are sort of
True.
really not that far away.
Yeah, yeah. You miss Brazil?
all the time.
all the time. So you prefer Brazil, USA, or London
Well, I love
to
living in
live?
London, but I consider myself a Brazilian American, so
Okay,
I put it before the American. So
okay. Are you seeing yourself being here in London or at some point going back?
I'll probably stay in London.
Hmm.
That's kind of where I see myself. Yeah.
Hmm. So it's more like because you're a professionally or because you can combine everything together?
Um, I think it's a combination of life,
Uh-huh.
work.
Uh-huh.
I have family here and in Europe. Um, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, Alexander, I'm, I'm really glad again that you joined this room with the number one, and so many things that I've learned, so many things that actually you gave me, food for thought, even for myself, and I think from some other people who might hear the podcast. So I'm again, thank you so much. I'm really, really
Thank you for
glad.
having me.
I'm really, really glad, and I'm sure that how's the goal going, and with your podcast when it comes to mental health and stuff, we might actually do something in the future when it comes specific to mental health because I think you can tell a lot of things because you have actually a personal experience when it comes even from the business and even from relationships and stuff, and even you even when you say earlier that 5 years ago you weren't the same person, so there was a lot of things that you experienced to change to who you are right now. So I'm really interested in mental health, so I think in the future we can make something like specifically in mental health, so the
Would
people will.
love to.
Yes, I think that would be great.
Thanks for having me as your guinea pig.
Alexander, that was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys, for listening.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, Spurs. Bye.
Bye.